Hello, and welcome to Cooper Soundwave's special series on YouTube. And we have Manfred, the guitar technician, here with us today. And he specializes in finding guitars and fixing them up and really making some good stuff. I've known Manfred for many decades. And even back in the day, he was making guitars and working on guitars. So without further ado, Manfred.
Thanks, Jessie. My first guitar was a little Harmony acoustic guitar that my mom and dad got at an estate sale. And I wasn't interested at first, but then I heard things on the radio that sounded fairly simple to me. And I thought, gee, that's only 3 notes. I could probably figure that out. And like anybody that is somewhat self-taught, you're going to be able to duplicate things that you hear, and then you'll develop a feel for similarities from one song to the next. Next thing you know, you're thinking a whole lot of these are the same chord structure, so it's a matter of trying to figure out what all these chords are. I went to the music store locally and bought a Mel Bay music course in the big brown envelope, and started learning chords, and went from there. As I was able to play a few chords and develop a little bit of a library of chord structure and relationships. I had other friends that I had met in school that had similar interests. So next thing you know, we're thinking we need to start a band. So it's a matter of all the other guys getting together with parents and family and whatever to figure out how to get equipment. That was always a big challenge. Typically, my first electric guitar was a Harmony Stratotone, and ended up getting a Fender Bandmaster. And that kind of got me started. As you start hearing things, you think, I don't sound like that record. There's something missing. That's when you discover effects and other things that people do to enhance their sound, to make it more interesting, and help to evolve your style of playing. And then it, depending on the equipment, the type of music that you listen to, it ends up developing what direction in style you want to go, so you end up specializing in certain things. So anyway, as you go through that evolution, things get more expensive. The gear wants to be upgraded. I ended up buying a little reverb unit, and then you buy a fuzz, and then you buy all this other stuff. Next thing you know, you have a need for additional guitars because they don't all sound the same. They don't all work the same. It's kind of like driving to the store in your little car and buying a bunch of lumber and no place to put it. And not every guitar is, full service for all your needs. So that's when you start looking at other things. I couldn't afford to buy guitars, but I had woodshop classes in school that taught me how to use materials, how to use tools, and I was able to duplicate some of the things that I saw on the things that I really wanted but couldn't afford. So I ended up, my first guitar that I made, as Jessie mentioned, I learned a lot about what to do and also what not to do, and a really big part of that was learning more about how materials behave. And so I ended up, I can't remember what happened to that guitar, but I didn't have it very long. I ended up upgrading my Harmony. I got a Fender Telecaster. Then I traded that for a Gibson SG. And so I was upgrading without really putting money out of my pocket. But every time I got a guitar, as you go through things and you're getting used to things, you think, I don't sound like everybody else. There's something different here. And I realized early on that a really big part of your sound is in your setup. Early on I learned about the action, how high your strings are away from the fretboard, and it makes a difference in the amount of effort that it takes to play. Consequently, it affects your speed, affects your tonality, and a whole bunch of other things come into play. So it was a way for me to get equipment in buying. I ended up looking around at thrift stores and that kind of stuff where, wow, somebody sort of messed this thing up and I think I can fix it. So next thing you know, I'm taking things apart, and as I did with building the first guitar, making wood parts, I was able to fabricate little parts out of aluminum, out of brass, and things that I could make a guitar work where somebody else had maybe had an accident or had a kind of a brainwave that said this is a good idea and ended up destroying the guitar or making it not operable. This guitar I have in my hand is an example of that. A young gentleman thought that he needed a scallop neck guitar, and I think that's a great idea, but typically they're fairly expensive, so he was going to build his own. This started off as a Maxi Strat, and he put Fender pickups on it. This is an early 70s and a couple of hot rod pickups. He had the neck scalloped, pearloid fingerboard or pick guard. Everything was right until the very last thing he did. When he got the neck back, he bought these roller guides, string trees, and when he was installing the nut on the neck, he cut the end of the fingerboard off because he bought the wrong kind of nut. And there was, because of the positioning of that nut, the string length was made 1/4 of an inch longer than it should have been. There was no way to make this guitar tune. And so I got it for a really good deal. I looked at all the components and determined that I could make that part. So I made a brass nut for it. Went down to the local Ace Hardware and bought a little piece of brass out of their little bin, cut it to length. It took, an hour for me to make it with a file. That's all I had to work with. So I cut the piece of the file, I shaped it with it, cut the slots. Next thing you know, this is the way it's been since I did that. And it plays really well and it stays in tune. So a really big part of messing with your own guitars is to understand what the parts do. And early on, you're going to find you have limitations. You don't know how materials work. You don't know maybe sometimes you don't know the full function of the guitar. For example, I bought guitars where a guy didn't know that you're not supposed to put these screws all the way down. Consequently, your tremolo doesn't work properly. Little things like that. So, it involves, these days, you don't have an excuse to not know because there's so much information available on YouTube and other sources online. I really wish I had that because I did make some mistakes that I really could have avoided if I had some of that information that's readily available today. So, a big part of what I buy at garage sales and estate sales and things like that, I really like working on used stuff because number one, you can get it very inexpensively. Number two, most of the time I can make it work. If I buy a guitar that I can't save for whatever reason, I use the parts from it for something else. So I have an inventory of pick guards fully loaded, Texas specials in them. And so I hot rod a lot of the guitars that I have. I've scalped my own necks. I've learned really quickly you don't do it with a Dremel tool because my first one, I'm embarrassed to show anybody that guitar in terms of aesthetics, but it plays really well. And it was a Korean-made Stratocaster that nobody wanted at the time. It had a plywood body. I've since put it on a Maxi Strat body. And it plays really well also. So you can make other people's mistakes work to your advantage. And you can make their mistakes corrected in a lot of times very easily. I bought a guitar a while back that it had a Floyd Rose tremolo on it. And the young gentleman that had the guitar, his mother bought the guitar for him. He broke a string. He didn't know how to replace a string on a Floyd Rose tremolo. So he took it to the music store, and after Mom paid another $75 on a brand new guitar that what he hadn't had for 2 weeks, he got it back. And 2 weeks later, he did the same exact thing again. Mom was done with that program. So they sold it to a pawn shop. I got it for a really good price. It's a Jackson Kelly. And knowing how that hardware works is really important before you think you're going to buy one. And it's not like a skateboard. You're going to use it forever the way it's shaped the day you buy it. Things change on a guitar, and it's really important to be able to understand the dynamics of mechanical things. I had another guitar that I had bought brand new years ago. It was a Stratocaster. I bought at a local music store. When I got it home, I realized that the neck, because I changed the gauge of the strings, which does make a difference in a lot of guitars, that gauge consequently made the neck shape a little bit different. This is an early 70s Stratocaster. And so I went to doing a truss rod adjustment on it, and as soon as I put that Allen wrench into the bullet, it snapped. So I'm looking at it thinking, that shouldn't have done that. I look at it, somebody had super glued it in place on the neck. I wasn't the first one to snap that thing, but they realized in a new music store, I don't know if it was done prior to the music store getting it or somebody at the store did it. You'll never find out, and it really doesn't matter. All you know is you have a broken guitar. So they ordered a neck for me. I got a replacement from Fender 3 months later. So my brand new guitar that wasn't 4 days old, I couldn't play it for over 3 months. And so, you go through things like that. The neat thing about buying used equipment is you can see how it's behaved for a period of time since it was on the store shelf or on the rack. And that way you have a little bit of an indicator of what it's going to do over time, or what it's already done gives you an indicator what it's probably going to continue to do. So that was a learning experience. I haven't bought a new guitar since then, except for recently. I bought some of these import online guitars just for the bodies because I put different necks on them and hot rod them and that kind of thing. But anyway, I guess you get out of it what you put into it. If you gain the knowledge, you know how to do things, you're going to be real successful, not only with the stuff that you keep, but I repair and sell guitars also. My philosophy is stack them deep and sell them cheap. I buy a lot of guitars, but I don't ask a lot of money for them. I'm real reasonable because I can be really efficient on how I fix a guitar. And when I fix it, it's functional. It's ready to go down the road and be used. So anyway, it's a matter of gaining knowledge that you're confident that you really know how things work. Don't take everybody's word for it. You can prove out things, and other things it doesn't hurt to double check your information sources, because I've seen guys do what they thought was correct, and they missed one little step that for some reason a detail was missed, or they just plain didn't know that materials behave the way they do sometimes. Things bend, things break, things crack. Typical example is that little crack right there on this guitar. That's been there since I've owned this neck and body. It hasn't changed, but aesthetically it's not perfect. But neither is other stuff on the guitar. That'll never affect the performance of the guitar, in my opinion. As long as that thing doesn't get bigger, it was probably done because somebody dropped the guitar or did something they shouldn't have done. That's the usual occurrence. So anyway, check your sources. Try to gain as much knowledge as you possibly can. Always double check before you start doing things, because there are things that you can't undo if you go the wrong direction. So, the more of this that you do, the more of it you will do. I had a friend call me the other day. He is in the process of reassembling an old Stratocaster that he has. I've known this gentleman for many, many years. He had confidence in me in handling his guitar. I didn't realize it until he brought it over. It was a 1957 Stratocaster. I resoldered things, and typically when you do that, you have to be very, very conscious of not changing the original instrument. I was very cautious I didn't add any solder to the guitar. I used what was already there. There were some little puddles where other people had messed with it. I took all that off. I made it look like a factory job. It doesn't hurt to make things look as clean and precise as possible. And if you know how to do that, there's no excuse for not doing it. It doesn't matter if it's your stuff or anybody else's stuff. But he'll come back to me for more stuff to do. I know that for a fact. And I don't mind doing it. I enjoy helping people on this kind of stuff. And it's fun to see people learn from what I can offer them and not make some of the mistakes that I had done early on when I was getting into this guitar stuff. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.